There were a lot of players that let us down last week, but the tight end position came through, and they decided to celebrate National Tight End Day by having the second highest tight end scoring week of the season. But when the tight end position blew up a couple of weeks back, the next week absolutely was a disaster. We need to hope for a little bit more consistency, and hopefully we get that in week 8. Yo, what is going on, Headliner Nation? The tight end position absolutely showed up and showed out for us last week, and hopefully you had one of the guys in your lineup that had a big day. But week 8 is a completely different story, and at least we're not dealing with any buys, so our lineup should be looking real good this week. So if you're new here to the Fantasy Headliners, hit that subscribe button and turn on the bell notification so you can start diving right into Headliner Nation and seeing everything that we put out on a weekly basis. But this episode is all about the tight ends, and we're going to kick it off on Thursday Night Football. This matchup is going to have a really interesting storyline for me at the tight end position. Cade Otton is basically getting no production whatsoever this year, but he has the highest snap percentage of any tight end in football. This guy plays over 90% of the Tampa Bay snaps, but yet doesn't see any targets. It's absolutely crazy, and that's one of the reasons why snap percentage doesn't always just translate to fantasy production. With Cade Otton, he's out there so much, I would really love for him to start getting some more looks from Baker Mayfield, and we'll keep an eye on that, but until we start seeing it consistently, we just can't buy into starting him as an option. Dalton Kincaid had his breakout performance of the 2023 season last week, and moving forward, we're going to be missing Dawson Knox for a while, who just had surgery on his wrist. So what type of upside will Kincaid bring? Hopefully a lot of like what we saw this past week. But these guys, they play two different types of positions. Even though Kincaid might be a tight end, he plays out in the slot way more often, where Dawson Knox typically played on the line like a traditional tight end would. So it's going to be interesting to see whether or not Kincaid stays out in the slot or they move him back onto the line. But whatever it may be, he should still see a decent amount of targets given that there will be no Knox, and should have an opportunity to maybe be on the field even a little bit more often. But the red zone opportunities that Dawson Knox used to get, hopefully Dalton Kincaid will start to get. Now, Tampa Bay is pretty darn good at defending against tight ends. They give up some points, but they have really athletic linebackers that can limit upside. Should see a few targets this week and offer a pretty decent floor, but Dalton Kincaid's ceiling really hinges on if we can get him in the end zone. Even though Dalton Schultz has scored a touchdown in each of the last 3 weeks, he is still only averaging about 35 yards per game and 3 receptions per game. So we're really banking on that touchdown right now. And while that's basically everybody at the tight end position, I can't really say that the guy is safe yet, given the fact that most of his production has been touchdowns, and now through the air, this isn't a great matchup for him. And while Houston allows the 5th most fantasy points to the tight end position, Hayden Hurst really has been on the outside looking in all year long. We're not really getting a whole lot of targets his way, and production just has not been there. I mean, the guy has 1 touchdown on the season, but is only averaging 2 catches and 19 yards per game. Right now, given this matchup could be a little bit better for him, I'll go ahead and list him in yellow, but he's not going to be a tight end 1 for me this week. In fact, he'll probably be right towards the end of the tight ends, or maybe on the outside looking in. It's hard to even consider Tyler Higbee at this point because Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp are getting almost 70% of the target share right now combined for the LA Rams. And then Tutu Atwell is still getting some looks for touchdowns. And really, when you take a look at what Higbee's upside is, it's basically non-existent. Even if he gives you 4 or 5 targets per game, that's not really enough unless he's scoring a touchdown. And when the Rams get down inside the red zone, they're running the football and they're not looking to Tyler Higbee in the end zone. So unfortunately, he's a guy that has just disappeared at this point. One of my biggest hopes this week is that Jake Ferguson was able to work his way into the game plan a little bit more often for the Dallas Cowboys. Just a few weeks ago, he was seeing almost 7 targets per game, and then that has just steadily declined. The dude hasn't seen nearly that many targets and hasn't produced anything over the last couple of weeks. So are the Dallas Cowboys going to try and get him going again? I would hope so. They've got to find a difference maker in this offense. They have got to find somebody to take the pressure off of CeeDee Lamb. Brandon Cooks has had a couple of up and down performances. We haven't heard a lot from Michael Gallup, and at this point, Jake Ferguson really could be the X factor and the key to unlocking this Dallas offense. He's going to be in yellow right now because until I see a more consistent output from him, I can't put him in green. So we'll keep our fingers crossed, and if you're playing him, let's just hope that he gets enough targets this week. After 3 straight weeks of being outside the top 12, especially after being one of the most reliable tight ends to start the season, TJ Hawkinson owners were getting a little bit frustrated, but he bounced back on Monday night and looked really good against San Francisco. Not a ton of ceiling last week, but he saw 11 targets. So to see him get those targets again absolutely makes a whole lot of difference for our fantasy lineups. And honestly, betting on between 8 to 10 targets per game right now with no Justin Jefferson seems pretty solid. Now, if his big plays and the yards aren't really there, his ceiling won't be as high as we would like. But you know what? At the tight end position right now, I'll take stability over anything. Luke Musgrave is getting a pretty decent matchup this week as well, but for some reason, we're just not seeing a whole lot out of him right now. And I don't know if it's because he just hasn't picked up everything yet or he's not being utilized as much as we would like. Jordan Love doesn't have an established number one right now. We're seeing up and down things from Christian Watson, Romeo Doubs, Aaron Jones has been injured. So to not get more targets towards Luke Musgrave is super confusing for me. But once again, this is another tight end that's got big play potential, and we have seen it happen this year. But until he's getting more consistent targets, we can't put him in green. And Luke Musgrave is about as getting close to green as you would like right now, but we just can't keep him consistent. He's got high upside, and if you're trying to play him, you're hoping for a big play or two to really help push those numbers up. But if you don't get them, more than likely you're going to be disappointed. I brought up Taysom Hill in the waiver wire video, and if you missed that, I'm going to take a few minutes to talk about him right now in this matchup because he's really the only guy that I'm looking at in this matchup. But for Taysom Hill, if you've been around a while, you know my frustrations with him, right? He's listed as a tight end on fantasy platforms, but he's not utilized as a tight end within his offense. So people get super excited thinking that Taysom Hill is some type of cheat code that they can toss in, and more times than not, he lets you down. Now, since the beginning of last season, people continue to play Taysom Hill over and over and over because he's getting work as a running back. He's getting work as a quarterback. He's doing all these different things. And the hope is oh, he's going to get us a touchdown or he's going to do something big and we're going to be able to utilize those yards. But basically about 85% of the time that Taysom Hill was started over the last year and a half or so, he's provided performances well outside the top 12 tight ends, and that's saying something considering how bad the tight end position is. But over the last couple of weeks, things have changed for Taysom Hill because now he's actually being utilized as a receiver. We've seen his targets increase, we've seen his receptions increase, and we've seen his receiving yards increase. He's actually being used as a pass catcher. And because of that, it does lead to more stable performances. I really want to make myself very clear on why I am changing my mindset on Taysom Hill. And I'm going to continue to list him in yellow here because I don't think he is super safe as of this time, because at any point in time, they could move away from utilizing Taysom Hill like that. And when that happens, he goes back to being one of the riskiest options you could look for. But as long as we come to an understanding, Headliner Nation, then I think we'll be all good. Taysom Hill will be inside my top 12 tight ends this week. As soon as Juwan Johnson returns, though, we're going to have to move him out. But just know, if you're starting Taysom Hill right now because of his receiving work, he's got top 12 potential at the position. If that changes, though, he will bottom out and he will start losing you weeks just like he has a majority of the time in the past. Hunter Henry has essentially disappeared over the last few weeks, and it makes sense. The Patriots offense has been horrid. But these are the type of matchups that we have to go back to the drawing board and say, hey, maybe Hunter Henry has hurt us a lot over the last few weeks, but these are the opportunities that we can't pass up. The Miami Dolphins I mean, they're probably going to be playing in a positive game script a majority of this game. And because of that, that's going to lead to more passing attempts and hopefully more targets for Hunter Henry, especially considering Miami hasn't been that great against tight ends this year. Miami currently allows the 6th most fantasy points to the tight end position. And while Mike Gesicki was the guy that scored last week, he only would have had like 1 fantasy point had it not been for that catch. So for me, Hunter Henry is still going to be the guy for Mac Jones. And Mac Jones played well enough last week to buy himself another week under center. So hopefully these two can get back to the drawing board this week, get back to the game plan, and get back to a point where they're being utilized together, and Hunter Henry will be back to a fantasy starter. It started to look like Zach Wilson might start targeting Tyler Conklin a little bit more often, but that really hasn't come to fruition. And the New York Giants allow the 9th fewest fantasy points to the tight end position. So for right now, we're not going to try and experiment with Tyler Conklin. However, it definitely could end up being another big Darren Waller week, just like last week. The Jets' defensive strength is going to be stopping the pass. They have 2 of the best cornerbacks in the league, and they were banged up before the bye, and hopefully everything is healthy and ready to go this week. But they still allow the most fantasy points to the tight end position. So because of that, Darren Waller definitely is going to be a guy that we can potentially toss into our lineup. And even though the results have not been great up until last week, we could get back-to-back weeks of solid fantasy production from Darren Waller. Now, the biggest question for me is going to be, who is the quarterback? I feel much safer with Darren Waller if Tyrod Taylor is there, because it feels like Taylor is looking to Waller a little bit more often than what Daniel Jones did. But we'll keep an eye on that throughout the week, and if things change, we'll absolutely update it in our rankings show. This is the type of matchup I would dream of for Pat Freiermuth. Jacksonville allows the 3rd most fantasy points to the tight end position. But Pat Freiermuth is hurt, and Pittsburgh hasn't used another tight end consistently in the passing game yet this season. So for this week, unfortunately, it just doesn't matter. And given the fact that Deontay Johnson is also back, I don't really see a tight end being utilized anytime soon. But Evan Ingram will still continue to be one of the keys that we talk about in this offense. Now, even though the Pittsburgh Steelers are ranked 25th against the pass right now, they allow the 4th fewest fantasy points to the tight end position. And that's why I've got Evan Ingram in yellow this week, because his ceiling is substantially lower than what we've seen this year, and his ceiling was already pretty darn low. He's getting a decent amount of targets, but he's not getting big plays and he's not scoring touchdowns. So he's a guy that's really just kind of flirting on being a tight end 1 right now. He's not losing you a whole lot of weeks, but he hasn't really won you any weeks either. That's great at the tight end position, because at least he's a guy that you can trust to get you pretty much the same amount of targets every single week. Now in this game, he might still get the same amount of targets, but once again, given how good Pittsburgh has been against tight ends, the ceiling just won't be there. It seems like Atlanta might be trying to get Kyle Pitts a little bit more involved. I mean, I would really hope so, and he had that great catch last week, but great catches don't translate into fantasy points. So that really doesn't matter for us a whole lot when we're trying to figure out if we're going to start him. Now, him and Jonnu Smith both are going to carry kind of a medium risk at this point. Smith is seeing more targets, and to me is a safer bet, but Kyle Pitts will continue to have a little bit more upside, even in a tough matchup like this. Tennessee currently allows the 7th fewest fantasy points to the tight end position. Now, they did just trade one of their best defensive players out of Tennessee, and that could help open up a few things this week, but it's going to kind of be the same thought process that I've had all season with these two guys. Jonnu Smith, if you're looking for a safe play that's going to get you a few targets and catch some of those for some yards and maybe get you 6 or 7 fantasy points, then that's what you want. If you want to be a little bit more risky, then you can go with a guy like Kyle Pitts, who might get you 3 or 4 fantasy points, but also would have a ceiling around 12. Well, Dallas Goedert, it sure is great to see you back and looking good in this Philadelphia offense. And to begin the year, you had a lot of us worried, but over the past couple of weeks, you are making up for it, and that's all we can ask. And hopefully going up against a Washington defense currently ranked 28th against the pass, we can keep this going. Now, it absolutely looks like Jalen Hurts has firmly put Dallas Goedert back as his number 2 target in this offense. It's A.J. Brown, it's Dallas Goedert, and it's Devontae Smith, which is really how we called it to begin the season, even though it didn't look like that. But now that we're getting some of that steady performance that we really need from Dallas Goedert, to me, he's back to being a safer play than a lot of other guys in the league. And given such a good matchup, he is absolutely going to be in green for me right now. Now, Logan Thomas is a little bit of a viable option this week. I'm not expecting a ton from him, but the one thing I do think he could help with this week is those short yardage situations. Sam Howell's going to have to get the ball out quickly. He held on to it way too long last week, and Washington finds themselves in a position far too often where they pass super early in the game, and they put themselves out of that positive game script that they would play a whole lot better in. So for this week in Logan Thomas, maybe he gets 6 receptions, but I don't think there's any big plays, and I don't think that there's any touchdowns. But those 6 receptions could get you like 45, 50 yards and still be just enough that you're getting enough fantasy points to help you win your league. If it hadn't been for some major penalties over the last 2 weeks, we would be talking about David Njoku in an entire different light. 2 weeks ago, he had 2 huge plays called back by a penalty. One of them would have been like a 40-yard touchdown. And then the same thing this past week, where he had more plays called back by penalties. And that, unfortunately, has got to change. And hopefully Cleveland is working on cleaning that up a little bit. But that might be a sign of some things to come for David Njoku. Now, my concern is that David Njoku is not being looked at by Deshaun Watson. He's being looked at by PJ Walker. And Deshaun Watson is not 100%. It came out yesterday that he's still dealing with some issues in his shoulder that is making it difficult to be at 100% in game. So we'll see what happens with PJ Walker this week. If he plays, then David Njoku is a guy that has a little bit more upside for me. And even though this is a tougher matchup, I'm going to go ahead and put David Njoku in yellow with PJ Walker. If it's Deshaun Watson, I'm probably moving David Njoku back to red. Mark Andrews is on absolute fire right now. After a huge performance against Detroit last week, he's got 5 touchdowns on the season. He's been a tight end 1 in every single game but 1 so far this year, and he's averaging over 13 points per game. He is still a very essential cog in that new look passing heavy offense for Baltimore, and it is benefiting him and Lamar Jackson quite a bit. Continue to roll out Mark Andrews with absolutely no worries because he's going to continue to get the volume. It does appear Trey McBride is going to be in for more work over the next few weeks now that Zach Ertz headed over to the IR. And even though I'm not interested in starting Trey McBride this week, I still wanted to address him in case somebody is out there looking for a current buy low option at the tight end position. Baltimore is way too good on the defensive side of the ball right now to try and start Trey McBride. So giving up the second fewest fantasy points to the tight end position doesn't seem like a great place to start for McBride, but hopefully over the next few weeks, he starts to establish himself in this offense, because prior to Zach Ertz being hurt, it already looked like he was starting to kind of bump up to tight end 1. So we'll see how things play out very soon. This matchup is going to be short and sweet. Denver, they don't utilize the tight end position. We're not interested in starting anybody for that team, regardless of who it is. The big thing here is Travis Kelce. Going up against a Denver defense that has trouble stopping a lot of teams and gives up the 4th most fantasy points to the tight end position, will likely give up a lot of fantasy points to Travis Kelce. George Kittle saw 6 targets last week with no Deebo Samuel in the lineup. And as long as Deebo Samuel continues to miss games, George Kittle should see an increased target percentage. Now, we know with George Kittle, he's got a good upside every single week. He's one of the most athletic tight ends in football. The dude can score from all over the place, and there's not many tight ends that can say that. The issue has been his floor, though, because he wasn't really getting those targets with Brandon Ayuk and Deebo Samuel, plus Christian McCaffrey now, all being healthy. But because they're banged up on the offensive side of the football, maybe George Kittle can get back to some of that upside that we have seen previously with a little bit of an increased floor. Cole Kmet was an absolute letdown last week, but with Bajan as the starting quarterback right now, I don't think we really know what to expect out of him on a weekly basis. Las Vegas was a really good matchup last week for Cole Kmet, and if Bajan isn't going to look his way, and if the Bears are truly going to rely on establishing the run and running the football as much as possible with Dante Foreman and Roshan Johnson apparently back at this week, it looks like, I don't really know what type of game plan we're going to get. So if you're trying to start Cole Kmet, yeah, he's got a decent ceiling given that it is a better matchup for him, but I think his floor sucks right now. Gerald Everett has touchdowns in back-to-back games, and when Mike Williams went down with his injury, I did tell everybody to keep an eye on Gerald Everett being utilized out of the slot more often. And since Mike Williams is down and Quentin Johnson really hasn't flourished as of yet, it has led to a little bit of a better opportunity for Everett. Now, his ceiling is a little bit higher now every week because of the fact that you've got that touchdown upside that he didn't have at the beginning of the season. But the biggest concern for me is his floor, because even with the injuries, you still have Josh Palmer, you still have Austin Eckler, and you still have Keenan Allen. And because of that, Everett isn't always going to be looked at as potentially the 2 or even 3 option in this offense. But this is another good matchup for him this week, so a touchdown is definitely in the cards. My Manscaped must-watch matchup of the week is going to be Las Vegas heading to Detroit, and 2 of the top tight ends drafted this past year. And with November a week away, we definitely need to be ready for beard season. And Manscaped has got a ton of new beard products that can help you get your beard looking absolutely fantastic. Head on over to manscaped.com, use code word headliners at checkout. You're going to get 20% off your entire order, and you're going to get free shipping on top of it. Now, 2 weeks ago, Michael Mayer basically doubled and even tripled his entire season output in one drive. But that was with Jimmy G. And then this past week with Brian Hoyer, it just absolutely disappeared again. So I'm going to be keeping an eye on, number one, who is going to be the guy at quarterback this week, and will they be looking to utilize Michael Mayer a little bit more often? Now, even though the production wasn't there last week, the routes run were, and that's still important at the tight end position, even though it doesn't give us a good look at how high the ceiling could be. It just shows us that it is still something to monitor. Detroit does give up the 3rd most fantasy points to the tight end position, and absolutely getting blown out by Mark Andrews last week didn't help that at all. So Michael Mayer's got a little bit of a decent ceiling for me this week. I like his potential, especially given Detroit's pass rush. Hopefully whoever the quarterback is just looking to get rid of the ball quickly, and Michael Mayer is on the receiving end of a few of those. Sam Laporta continues to be a stud, and we haven't had a big performance from him in a couple of weeks, but this could absolutely be the opportunity to get back on track. Detroit's at home on Monday night, coming off a horrible loss to Baltimore. I guarantee you this offense is going to want to put on a show, and Sam Laporta should be right in the middle of it. All right, Headliner Nation, there you have it. Every single matchup for the tight end position in week 8. And there was a few guys that I didn't even bother to talk about. And I'm a big believer in not wasting your breath on things that don't matter. And unfortunately, there's a lot of tight ends right now that just don't matter. But do me a favor before you get out of here, hit that like button. Let me know down in the comments below, what is one tight end this week that you think is ranked outside the top 12 but could finish top 5. Let me know in the comments down below. And of course, if you're new here, you gotta subscribe, but make sure if you're watching right now, you turn the notifications on. So anytime we go live or drop a video, you're gonna know about it right away. I'm gonna get out of here though, Headliner Nation. Peace out, stay safe, stay healthy, and I'll catch you all on the next episode of the Fantasy Headliners.